Hey, have you ever had Coca-Cola? It's pretty good, right? Especially if you had it back when they added that, other ingredient. But did you know that the creation of Coke happened completely by accident? Yeah, it turns out that the guy was trying to make some sort of medicine and he ended up making, well, not medicine. It was made by a guy called John Stiff Pemberton. John became addicted to morphine after his time in the Civil War. And since he didn't want to constantly be higher than Ozzy Osbourne in the 1970s, John decided to make an alternative to the morphine. So he tried making something which would help with his pain, but also be less addictive, which is when he made the first ever version of Coke. His first recipe was a mix of Coke leaves and wine. But in 1886, the government made alcohol illegal in Atlanta. Yeah, sure, make alcohol illegal, but keep the Coke. Nice work. But the ban meant that John had to change his recipe, so he removed the alcohol and kept selling his drink. It's kind of crazy how much people like Coca-Cola, since it's pretty much drunk all over the world, and the people behind it made some insane marketing campaigns that changed Western culture. Like, for example, the creation of Santa Claus, or at least the modern version. Next up, have you ever looked at a Post-it note and thought, wow, this little sticky square changed everything? Probably not, but it totally did. Back in 1968, a chemist named Spencer Silver was working at a company called 3M, trying to create a super strong adhesive. Instead, he ended up with something that barely stuck to anything. At first, it seemed like a total flop. But then, another 3M guy named Art Fry came up with a genius idea. He was tired of his bookmarks falling out of his hymn book during choir practice, which is a problem that we all probably had at one point, right? So, he decided to try out Silver's useless adhesive to make a sticky bookmark that wouldn't fall out. And just like that, Post-its were born. So when Spencer realized his product wasn't as useless as he thought, he got the company to launch the product. And luckily for them, with the help of some marketing effort, the product was an instant success. Speaking of accidental inventions, let's talk about the microwave. Imagine for a second that you're working on radar equipment in the 1940s, and suddenly your chocolate bar melts in your pocket. Weird, right? Well, that's exactly what happened to Percy Spencer. He was goofing around with a thing called a magnetron. Sick name, by the way. When he noticed his chocolate bar had started to melt in his pocket, instead of just being annoyed about the mess, weirdly enough, Percy wasn't scared of the fact that he could probably be getting roasted by radiation, and instead he started experimenting with his new party trick. He put some popcorn kernels near the magnetron, and after a few seconds, popcorn started popping all over the place. Next up, he tried it with an egg, which straight up just exploded. But Percy wasn't deterred, and he realized he could make a ton of money by selling this thing. And that discovery led to what some people call the single greatest invention in human history. Not most people, but probably some people, right? Anyway, the microwave oven, which got the lame name of Radar Range. The thing was massive, like 6 feet tall and over 750 pounds. Not exactly something you'd put on your kitchen counter, but restaurants and ships loved how fast it could heat food. So by 1967, the first countertop microwave was born. You know that lovely ripping sound your shoes made when you took them off as a kid? You can thank a Swiss engineer named George de Mestral for that. That's probably how you say his name. In 1941, he went for a walk in the woods and noticed that seeds called burrs were stuck all over his clothes and his dog's fur. Most people would just brush them off and move on, but not this dude. He got curious. He took a look under the microscope and saw that the burrs were covered in tiny hooks that latched onto fabric loops. That got him thinking. What if he could create a fastener that worked in the same way? And after years of goofing around and experimenting, he came up with Velcro, a combination of the French words for velvet and hook. At first, people didn't really see the point, because zippers and buttons look a whole lot cooler than those lame Velcro that only little kids use. And I'm not a little kid, I haven't used them for like 2 years, I'm grown up. But then NASA started using it in the 1960s to secure stuff in zero gravity, and suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of it. Velcro went on to revolutionize everything from shoes to spacesuits. It made life easier for parents trying to stuff their kids into shoes and gave people with disabilities more independence. It even became a pop culture icon with things like Velcro walls. But apart from the fact that these things were pretty useful, Velcro is one of the first big examples of biomimicry, which pretty much means we take inspiration from nature to solve human problems. Ever wonder what it would be like to see through walls and skin? Kinda creepy of you, but back in 1895, Wilhelm Röntgen accidentally discovered a way to do exactly that. And it all started with a cardboard tube. Röntgen was messing around with cathode rays in his lab when he noticed something strange. Out of nowhere, a fluorescent screen nearby just started glowing, even though it wasn't in the path of the rays. Obviously, Röntgen was interested. He started experimenting, putting different objects between the tube and the screen, and when he placed his hand in the way, he saw the shadow of his bones on the screen. At that point, I would probably destroy the thing to keep the angry spirits living inside of it happy, but he didn't. He knew that he'd found something massive. He called these mysterious rays X-rays because, well, X stands for unknown. Just imagine your doctors trying to explain to you that they're going to blast you with unknown rays of death so they can see your bones. If I was a dude in the 20th century, I would not be chill with that. But X-rays quickly revolutionized medicine. Suddenly, doctors could look inside the human body without cutting it open, which is much better than having to cut open someone's entire leg to see if they have a broken bone. But the X-rays weren't just a medical miracle. People got really excited about them. There was even an X-ray craze where people believed that these rays could do all sorts of wild things like reading minds or seeing ghosts. Some people were so worried about being spied on through walls that they started buying X-ray proof underwear, which does look pretty neat, I'm not gonna lie. But since it was the 20th century, they had to at least make sure that the machine was causing just as much harm as it was doing good. Early X-ray machines used way too much radiation, leading to serious health problems for the first technicians who operated them. But besides the risks, X-rays opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Not just in medicine, but in fields like archaeology, art authentication, even airborne security. You've probably used superglue before, but did you know that it was created fully by accident? During World War II, Dr. Harry Coover was working at Eastman Kodak, trying to develop clear plastic gun sights. Instead, he ended up with this incredibly sticky substance. At first, Coover dismissed it as useless, but years later he realized its potential as a fast, strong adhesive. By 1958, superglue hit the market, and it didn't take long for people to realize how crazy useful it was. But here's the insane part. During the Vietnam War, medics started using superglue to close wounds quickly on the battlefield. Which sounds really painful, not gonna lie. It was like battlefield first aid, with a tube of glue instead of stitches. And it actually did work, which is pretty fun. The glue also made people really into DIY projects. Suddenly people had the power to fix things themselves. It gave us the confidence to try and repair things on our own, instead of just tossing them out. But of course, with great sticking power comes great responsibility. Since there's been countless people that have glued themselves to random objects or even glued their eyes shut like someone has actually done before. Anyway, speaking of sticky things, let's talk about Play-Doh. Originally, this stuff wasn't made for kids at all. Back in the 1930s, a company called Kutal Products was looking for a way to clean wallpaper. They developed a doughy substance that could be rolled over wallpaper to remove soot and dirt. It was back in the day when coal was the main source of heat and homes got pretty grimy. But then, in the 1950s, vinyl wallpaper came along and the demand for this wallpaper cleaner pretty much just vanished. Things weren't looking good for Kutal, but just when it seemed like the product was heading for the trash heap, the sister-in-law of one of the company's executives came up with a brilliant idea. She was a school teacher and noticed that the kids in her class loved making shapes with the wallpaper cleaner. She said that they should rebrand it as a toy, and just like that, Play-Doh was born. They added some color, put it in a yellow can, and marketed it as a fun, non-toxic modeling clay for kids. And it was a hit. Play-Doh became one of the most iconic toys of the 20th century, inspiring creativity and keeping kids entertained for generations. But I know a toy that is even more fun for kids to use: dynamite. Alfred Nobel, a Swedish chemist, was trying to find a safer way to handle nitroglycerin, which is a highly volatile liquid used in explosives. After a tragic accident where his brother died in a nitroglycerin explosion, Nobel was determined to find a solution. One day, he accidentally discovered that when nitroglycerin was absorbed into a porous material like soft rocks, it became much safer to handle and transport. This new, more stable form of nitroglycerin could be shaped into sticks, and Nobel called it dynamite. He patented his invention in 1867, and it quickly became the go-to explosive for construction, mining, and, unfortunately, warfare. Nobel made a ton of money from dynamite, but he was deeply troubled by its use in war. That led him to establish the Nobel Prizes, including the famous Nobel Peace Prize, as a way to leave a positive legacy. Which obviously worked because there hasn't been a single war ever since he made the prize. I guess everyone just wants to earn it, huh? Someone who definitely should have won a Nobel Prize was Walter Jaeger. That's because old Walter here made the first ever smoke detector, which is pretty cool. The story dates back to 1939, when Walter was working on a different project altogether. Walter was attempting to develop a sensor that could detect poison gas. The idea was that if toxic gas was present, it would interact with the sensor and trigger an alarm. But during his experiments, he saw that his sensor wasn't working as expected. The poison gas just didn't cause the sensor to trigger, which was disappointing. So in order to be less stressed, Walter lit a cigarette. As he exhaled the smoke near the sensor, something unexpected happened. The sensor's needle on the meter moved. That means that the device was responding to the particles in the smoke, even though it hadn't reacted to the poison gas. Walter's discovery that his sensor could detect smoke instead of gas led to the development of early smoke detection technology. While Walter's invention wasn't an immediate success, it laid the groundwork for what would eventually become modern smoke detectors. Years later, in the 1960s, the first practical and affordable home smoke detectors were finally developed using similar principles. These devices have become essential for fire safety and have saved countless lives. I do wonder though if he ever finished his original project and made something to detect toxic gas like he intended. But either way, it was good. YouTube thinks that you'll like this video next, so click it.